Most Linux users don't actually need Linux. And that statement alone is enough to trigger comment wars, angry forum threads, and at least 3 Reddit debates that spiral into package manager comparisons. But before you close this video or type an all caps response, let's slow down and really think about what that sentence means. This isn't an attack on Linux. It's not a defense of Windows or macOS either. It's a reality check. Because somewhere along the way, switching to Linux stopped being about need and started being about identity. For years, Linux has been framed as the smarter choice, the freer choice, the more secure choice, the more ethical choice. It's positioned as the escape route from corporate surveillance, forced updates, bloated software, and restrictive ecosystems. And in many ways, those arguments are valid. Linux is powerful. It's flexible. It's open. It gives you control in ways that mainstream operating systems simply do not. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Control is only valuable if you actually use it. The average computer user today does not compile kernels. They do not configure custom window managers. They do not patch drivers. They do not need advanced networking stacks or container orchestration tools on their personal laptop. Most people open a browser, check email, watch videos, maybe edit some documents, maybe play a few games, and that's it. If that describes you, then the honest question becomes, what problem is Linux solving for you? A lot of people switch to Linux because they're frustrated. Windows updated at the wrong time. A driver broke. An ad appeared in the start menu. macOS locked down something they wanted to customize, so they jumped to Linux expecting freedom. And at first, it feels amazing. No forced updates, no product keys. No activation, no pre-installed junk. It feels clean, it feels fresh. It feels like you've escaped something oppressive. But after that honeymoon phase ends, daily reality kicks in. You still open the same browser. You still use the same websites. You still rely on many of the same cross-platform tools. The underlying operating system changes, but your actual computing habits don't. This is where the contradiction appears. Many Linux users celebrate features they never touch. They praise customization they never use. They defend terminal workflows they rarely rely on. They talk about the philosophy of open source more than their actual daily experience, and that's not hypocrisy. It's just human psychology. We like the idea of having power more than we like actually exercising it. If you install Linux but use it exactly like Windows or macOS, open Chrome, use web apps, store files in the cloud, play a few Steam games, you are not really benefiting from Linux's unique strengths. You're just using a different launcher for the same browser-based life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it does mean that Linux wasn't necessary. It was optional. There's also the complexity factor. Linux is dramatically easier today than it was 10 years ago. Distros like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora, and Pop_OS have polished installers, driver support, graphical software centers, and modern desktop environments. You can absolutely use Linux without touching the terminal. But the moment something goes wrong, the expectation changes. Suddenly you're reading forum posts. You're copying commands. You're editing configuration files. You're troubleshooting audio servers. You're learning about display protocols. For some people, that's exciting. For others, it's exhausting. If your primary goal is to get work done with minimal friction, the mainstream systems are often smoother. They have direct vendor support. They have first-party drivers. They have official builds of professional software. They have predictable compatibility with hardware manufacturers. That stability is not glamorous, but it is convenient. And convenience is what most users actually value, even if they don't want to admit it. Another big reason people switch to Linux is privacy. And yes, Linux distributions typically collect far less telemetry than Windows or Mac OS. That matters. But let's be honest about something else. If you log into Google, use YouTube, browse social media, use cloud storage, and carry an Android or iPhone everywhere, your privacy profile is not fundamentally transformed by switching your desktop OS. Your digital footprint is dominated by online services, not your kernel choice. So while Linux reduces operating system-level tracking, it doesn't magically turn you invisible in the modern web ecosystem. Gaming is another area where the narrative has shifted. Thanks to Proton and Valve's investment in Linux gaming, it's easier than ever to play many Windows titles on Linux. That's incredible progress, but compatibility is still not perfect. Anti-cheat systems break. Some games require tweaks. Some simply don't run. If gaming is your primary hobby and you want zero friction, Windows still wins in simplicity. You can absolutely game on Linux, but again, the question is about need. Are you choosing Linux because it's necessary, or because you prefer the philosophy and are willing to accept trade-offs? Then there's the aesthetic argument. Many people switch to Linux because it looks better. And yes, modern desktop environments like KDE Plasma and GNOME can be stunning. You can theme them endlessly. You can transform your desktop into something futuristic or minimalistic. But Windows and macOS have also evolved visually. They are not the rigid, ugly systems they once were. And most users don't spend hours theming their interface. They set a wallpaper and move on. Let's talk about developers. This is where Linux truly shines. If you're a backend developer, a DevOps engineer, a cybersecurity professional, or someone deeply embedded in open-source ecosystems, Linux makes sense. Native package managers, container tooling, scripting environments, and server parity are genuine advantages. But here's the catch. Not everyone who installs Linux is doing this kind of work. A large percentage of users are not compiling code daily. They're not deploying servers. They're not building kernels. They're consuming content and doing general productivity tasks. There's also a social element to Linux. It feels empowering to be part of a community that values freedom and technical literacy. It feels good to say you don't rely on a corporate ecosystem. There's a sense of independence. But independence can quietly become performative. You can reject Microsoft while still depending heavily on Google. You can reject Apple while still relying on proprietary drivers. The ecosystem is more interconnected than we pretend. And then there's hardware support. Linux has improved massively, but it still depends on manufacturer cooperation. Some Wi-Fi cards need extra drivers. Some laptops have function keys that behave oddly. Some GPUs require specific configuration for optimal performance. When things work, they work beautifully. When they don't, the troubleshooting process can be intimidating. For enthusiasts, this is a puzzle. For average users, it's a burden. Now let's flip the script for a moment. If Linux is not necessary for most users, why does it feel so important? Because it represents choice. It represents an alternative. It proves that computing doesn't have to be locked down. Even if you personally don't need Linux's full power, its existence pressures other companies to improve. It keeps the ecosystem competitive. It fuels innovation. That matters. But symbolic importance is different from personal necessity. You can support open source without running Linux full-time. You can use open source apps on Windows. You can contribute financially to projects. You can advocate for interoperability. Your operating system alone does not define your values. Another uncomfortable truth is that many Linux users eventually drift back to Windows or macOS. Not because Linux failed, but because their workflow demanded something easier. Adobe Creative Cloud is still dominant in many industries. Certain professional tools are Windows only. Some enterprise environments standardize on specific platforms. Fighting against that current can become tiring. And when people switch back, they often feel guilty, as if they've betrayed a cause. But this isn't a moral battle. It's a tool choice. There's also the time investment factor. Learning Linux deeply takes time. Understanding file permissions, package management differences, system services, and configuration layers is not trivial. That knowledge is valuable. It builds technical confidence. But if you don't need that knowledge for your career or hobbies, then the return on investment might be low. Time is finite. Not everyone wants to spend it debugging audio daemons. Security is another topic frequently used to justify Linux adoption. Linux is often considered more secure by default due to its permission model and lower malware targeting rate. But security is also about user behavior. Phishing attacks, weak passwords, and compromised accounts don't care what OS you use. If you practice poor security hygiene, Linux will not save you. And modern Windows and Mac OS systems have significantly improved in sandboxing, encryption, and built-in protections. One of the biggest myths is that Linux is automatically faster. On older hardware, lightweight distros can absolutely revive aging machines. That's a real advantage. But on modern hardware, Windows and Mac OS are optimized heavily by the companies that design both the software and often the hardware. The performance difference for typical tasks is often negligible. If you're editing 4K video or compiling massive codebases, optimization matters. But if you're watching Netflix, it doesn't. Let's address the identity layer more directly. For some people, being a Linux user becomes part of who they are. It signals technical competence, it signals independence. It signals alignment with open source philosophy. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Communities form around shared tools all the time. But when identity becomes the primary driver, objectivity can fade. Criticism feels personal. Alternatives feel threatening. That's when the conversation stops being about utility and starts being about belonging. Most Linux users don't actually need Linux because their computing tasks are platform agnostic. Browsers dominate modern workflows. Cloud services abstract away local dependencies. Streaming replaces local media libraries. Web-based collaboration tools replace installed Office suites. The operating system becomes a thin layer under a browser. In that world, the differences shrink dramatically. But here's the nuance. Not needing something doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. You don't need a mechanical keyboard, but you might enjoy it. You don't need a high refresh rate monitor, but it can improve your experience. You don't need Linux, but you might prefer how it feels. Preference is valid. Enthusiasm is valid. Hobbyist curiosity is valid. The problem arises when Linux is marketed as the universal solution to everyone's frustrations. It's not. It solves specific problems exceptionally well. It empowers specific workflows brilliantly, but it also introduces its own complexities. Pretending otherwise sets new users up for disappointment. If you recommend Linux to someone who just wants a stable machine for work and entertainment, you have to consider their tolerance for troubleshooting. You have to consider software requirements. You have to consider their patience. Because if something breaks and they don't know how to fix it, the romantic idea of open source won't help them meet a deadline. There's also the fragmentation issue. Multiple distributions, multiple desktop environments, multiple package formats. For enthusiasts, this diversity is beautiful. For newcomers, it's overwhelming. Windows and macOS present a unified front. Linux presents a landscape. That landscape is powerful, but it requires navigation. Ironically, many Linux users end up recreating the convenience of proprietary systems. They install proprietary codecs. They install closed-source drivers. They use commercial apps through compatibility layers. They rely on cloud services owned by large corporations. The purity narrative fades in practical daily use. And yet, Linux continues to grow. Why? Because even if most users don't need it, some absolutely do. Servers run on it. Infrastructure depends on it. Developers build on it. Researchers customize it. Embedded systems rely on it. Its flexibility at scale is unmatched. Its transparency enables auditing. Its modularity enables innovation. The key distinction is between critical infrastructure and casual desktop use. On the server side, Linux is essential. On the average consumer desktop, it's optional. That's not a downgrade. It's a recognition of context. So if you're watching this as a Linux user, ask yourself honestly, what would actually break in your life if you switched back to Windows or macOS tomorrow? Would your workflow collapse? Or would you just miss the feeling of control? There's no shame in either answer, but clarity matters. If you're considering switching to Linux, ask yourself what problem you're solving. Is it performance on old hardware? That's valid. Is it development tooling? Also valid. Is it curiosity? Perfectly fine. But if it's vague frustration or online hype, pause and evaluate. Most Linux users don't actually need Linux. They choose it. And choice is powerful. But we should stop pretending that it's a universal necessity. It's a tool. A brilliant, flexible, open tool. But still a tool. The real maturity in tech comes when we stop tying our identity to our operating system and start treating it like what it is. A layer that enables our work and creativity. If Linux enables yours better, use it proudly. If another system does, that's fine too. In the end, the operating system should disappear beneath your workflow. It should serve you quietly. If Linux does that for you, fantastic. If it becomes a project in itself that you never truly needed, then maybe the bold statement at the beginning wasn't an insult. It was an invitation to reflect. Most Linux users don't actually need Linux, but the fact that they can choose it, anyway, might be the most important thing of all.